And God said, "Let there be
The
light."
Lord says, "Let my people go."
I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me.
This is the Talkin' Bible podcast.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Friday's episode of Talkin' Bible. Last one for the week. Last one with Adrian for a couple of months.
September.
Till September. So we're in the beginning of July here, and so another couple of months and Adrian will be back with us again. And in this episode, Adrian, we are talking about a payment of the temple tax.
Yeah, yes. Which apparently was an annual tax levied against people leveled against males over 20 years age.
Over 20? Okay.
And it was means of supporting the temple's operation.
Yeah.
So that's how they had their thing.
Do you know if it was in the law of Moses or did it come in later?
It's based back on something in Exodus.
In Exodus, yes.
So it's based on that.
Yes.
And it was connected just before the Passover.
Okay, yep.
But you had everyone come into Jerusalem for the Passover anyway. At that time they could
That's right. They would collect the tax, yeah.
And it was about a day's wages. And say you had 1 million males, because there's probably more than that, then it's quite a lot
Quite
of
a substantial amount of money.
But that is to run the whole temple. And
that's right. That was for to keep the temple upkeep. I mean, it was a big complex. It needed to be renovated and cleaned and, maintained. All of those things. So
it's like these churches today, you've got to keep the aircon running.
Got to stop the roof leaking, which we haven't done yet.
All those little things.
Yeah, that's right.
That we forget about, but
and so it was used to do that.
And that's what they specifically collected it for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so Peter, with his big mouth, they asked him, does your master pay it? He said, yeah, of course he does.
Yeah, of course he's going to pay it. So this is in Jerusalem. This is in Capernaum, up in Galilee. They come and they're being sent out around the nation to collect the annual tribute.
Okay, so
tribute tax. So this is nowhere near Jerusalem.
So, all right. So you got the tax collectors going out knocking on people's doors.
Basically. Yep, travelling around collecting the tax. You got to remember that not everyone was going to Jerusalem every year because by this stage anyway. So it would make sense that they would send out their tax collectors to make sure everyone paid their tax. So this is a tax that's different to the Roman tax. So the Romans are the occupying force. They have their own tax collectors. Matthew was one of those. But this is an over and above tax, which was specifically a Jewish tax for the temple upkeep. Yeah, that's good to understand. This is the Jewish house of God. So that's the context for what Jesus is about to say to Peter.
Okay, so it's a Jewish house of God which the Jewish people are maintaining. It's like you'd expect the congregation here to help maintain this
value
place.
of the church. Exactly. Yeah, we don't tax people. We ask them to pay their tithes and offerings, and we explain what this is all about. But this was actually taxed. This was a requirement that they pay. Yeah.
And that sort of reminds me back and it still happens in Britain apparently, people go around asking you got radio licences. We don't have them in Australia anymore. But
radio licence?
For people or TV licences at least in Britain, you're supposed to have a licence to watch.
To watch TV?
TV, yes.
Oh, I've never heard that.
And that money theoretically goes back and supports the BBC.
So that was how they paid for the BBC in the early days. Okay.
Yeah. And that's how it used to be done in Australia at one stage too.
Okay.
And, we had people...
Some of those old British rules have probably never been repealed.
Yeah. When we were in a flat once, people come and check we had a radio licence.
Okay. No, I've never heard of that. That's news.
That's because you're too young.
I'm too young. But it does make sense. Yeah, they would have had to be able to pay for these services back in that day. Yeah.
That's how governments do it. They just tax people.
Yep.
Yeah. Anyway, Peter said, does he pay it? And he said, yeah. And Jesus, smart, before
Peter even said
anything, says, who do you think people collect the tax? What do you think, Simon? From whom do the kings of the earth collect customs or poll tax? From their sons or from strangers? That has changed. Now the countries tax their citizens and tax their citizens on their tax and tax their citizens on the tax on the tax.
But in that era, normally the citizens were exempt from tax. So certainly in the Roman Empire, just for some context, the Roman citizens were exempt from many taxes. Some, depending on what they were, there might be some taxes they were still required to get, but they taxed the conquered peoples.
Yes.
So once you became a Roman citizen, you were exempt from a degree of taxes. That's the context Jesus is talking about here.
Well, that was a good reason for conquering our own nations to take their wealth and use it to...
Absolutely, it was. Yeah, exactly that context, and that's what Jesus is asking here. You know, kings don't tax their own people, do they? So it's important. That's a really good cultural context, because we would go, well, yeah, we do. We rely on those taxes, but we're in a democratic society. This was an era where empires, when money came from conquering people.
I wonder how they kept track of it. It's not like nowadays where you got your ABN on your tax file number and all those things.
No, it's actually not that different. In fact, most of the ancient records of writings that we have come from records of tax collection.
Okay.
So a lot of ancient writing is tax collection, receipts, that kind of thing. So yeah, they would have had a tax collector. They would subsidize. So Matthew being a tax collector, so Matthew would have been employed by the Romans to keep the books and then make sure that everyone paid their tax, and then he'd have to be able to record that and reference that up. So it's not that different to today. It was that, in fact, the best historical evidence, archaeological evidence that we have for the history of writing is actually payments of money, taxes. It's receipts. So, which is fascinating to me that out of all the reasons they invented writing, it was actually for tax.
But
so you say there's two things. What is it? Death and tax is the only two things that are certain in the world. It's been like that way throughout history.
It's so logical, though, isn't it?
It does make sense, doesn't it?
Yeah, it makes sense. I thought when speed cameras first came out, and then the mobile ones, I thought if they sort of franchise that out to get your car where you go park wherever you want and book people as you went past, would be a fantastic way of making money.
Would be a way to make money, yeah. Franchise out the speed cameras.
Yeah, I'm not sure how they do it. They get in trouble off people for putting them in places where people speed and stuff like that.
Yeah, probably. But that's an interesting perspective. Yeah, same sort of thing. That's what they were freelancing, or not the word I'm after. They were. What does the government do? What do they when they delegate out to private corporatize? Privatize. That's the word I'm after. They just privatize things. That's what they were doing. They would privatize their tax collection. So in this case, that's how the Romans worked. And whether or not these tax collectors that were collecting the temple tax were private ones operating on behalf, they were paid to do it, or whether they were actually employees of the temple system, that doesn't say here. Scholars would know. I wouldn't know. But the point was Jesus was making here that in that culture, the citizens were exempt.
Yep.
And that helps. We've said we've gone a wrong way to say that, but that's why it's important, because this is what Jesus says, doesn't he?
Yeah. The interesting too is they go out and say does he pay the tax? But Jesus was travelling around the country, so how to keep track of people who were travelling?
Yeah,
as
true.
well.
I guess so. Yeah,
because I paid at the last city. Yeah.
Partly why I'll say, obviously, as is the case, the purpose of census data throughout history, in these days, was for things like taxation.
Okay.
Yeah, so they did census so they could actually tax people in their hometowns and all that sort of stuff. So, yeah, I mean, it wouldn't have been as, there's no ABN, there's no tax file number. It would have been, I'm sure that there would have been more ways to dodge the system than there is today. But they did everything they could within their power to make sure that citizens pay their taxes.
But the Romans would say, okay, there's 10,000 people in that city, we expect this much tax.
That's how they do it.
And Matthew would have to get that tax somehow.
Exactly. And you see that's how the British aristocracy was set up throughout the Middle Ages. The king would say, there's this many people, it's up to you, you're the lord of the land, you're the lord of that manor, it's up to you to find that tax however you want. And when wartime came, they just demanded it from the borough or from the lord, and the lord had to find the money. So yes, it wasn't like it was managed to a degree where every citizen was measured by the king. There was a system of, I'm going to get this much money out of you. It's up to you how you get that tax. Okay. And if you want to kill people to get it, I don't care. That was the mentality.
So we live in a lot more civilised,
much more civilised world. Yeah. Yep.
And the thing is, Jesus here, he says, so that we don't offend them, go out to the sea and throw in the hook. But Jesus later is very offensive towards the Pharisees. But this is in 17, and it's not for another couple of chapters before it's time to actually offend them, so they'll kill him.
Yeah, exactly. And he's in Capernaum here.
He's different place as well.
Different place. But you're right, Jesus later on wants to pick a fight with them and calls them on it. But here he's decided, I kind of read this story with a bit of a chuckle on his face. Hey, Pete, you know those tax collectors, who do they get tax from? From themselves, from their citizens, or from the foreigners? Well, no, the citizens are free. And he says, but I don't want to offend them. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to head down to the river, throw your line in, and catch a fish. And bring the fish back, and it's got the money in it to pay the tax. It's like Jesus is having fun with them here,
I don't quite understand how Peter would feel when Jesus said, "Go get a fish and look at its mouth for some money"?
I sort of see Peter going, "Oh, Jesus, you again? Oh, well, I've seen you do a few things. You'll figure this out."
Yeah, it's some of the things that Jesus does are just so, I don't know, they're just so almost unbelievable.
Yeah. And I should add here, I mean, the fact that a fish has a coin in its mouth, that this fish has a coin in its mouth, is not as big a miracle. It's not impossible.
Okay.
What's impossible, what's a miracle is that Jesus told Peter, going, the first fish you'll catch will have a coin in its mouth. They actually have a particular fish. They call it St. Peter's fish. It's got a biological name. I can't remember what it is, that lives in the Sea of Galilee. We've gone to the sea and had it for lunch. But it's often found with coins or rocks in its mouth. It's just the way it feeds.
Okay.
So it wouldn't have been totally uncommon to have these coins, but still that doesn't detract from the miracle that Jesus is saying, "Hey, Pete, go out and get the fish." And lo and behold, there's a fish with the coin in the mouth to pay exactly the right amount of money to pay the temple tax.
Because if I guess that some of them eat the rocks and whatever to help break up other food to digest.
Yes,
stuff like
I think
that.
there is. I can't remember what. There's a whole story behind the St. Peter's fish and the name of the fish, and why they eat that way. They're like, yeah, exactly. That's what they do. It's not that uncommon.
But someone dropped a coin at
the right amount
place,
at
the
right
time,
place,
so that the right fish would get in his mouth. So when Peter came,
threw his line in, first fish he catches has the money in it.
And now if you're taking,
don't tell me that's a chance.
If he took too long to bait the hook, would he have got the wrong one? If he stopped off to get a coffee on the way,
all of that,
all those little things.
The sovereignty of God, and that's what I mean. This is one of those ones where Jesus is just. I think Jesus is just having fun. Yes. He's illustrating a point.
He is, yes.
He's illustrating a point in this. Yeah, we're exempt from the tax. We shouldn't have to, because what he's saying is, I shouldn't have to pay the tax because it's my house.
Yes.
I'm actually the king. That's the point he's trying to make. So in that point, he's saying the kings don't pay taxes themselves. The kings don't charge their citizens tax. I'm the king. You're a citizen. We're actually technically exempt, but we don't want to cause offence.
No.
So let's make sure we pay it.
Because the people who were trying to charge would just go away. Because there was still a lot to do on his trip to Jerusalem. And
exactly.
stuff.
So he probably went, this is easier to deal with this.
The thing is, though, he had people supporting him, so you'd think they would have had some. And
they did have some wealth.
Judas had the money bags.
Yeah, exactly. All of those things.
It's all that, but in spite of that, he did this.
He did this miracle. He did this fish miracle. Story. That's why I just chuckle. I just think this is Jesus having a bit of fun.
Yeah, and so people want to say that Scripture's just made up stuff, but you wouldn't make up a story.
You don't make that up. No, heck no.
It's too silly to be made up.
It's too silly to be. If it's not true, it's ridiculous.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
Totally. Yep. Exactly.
But after talking this week about persecution and people hating us and all those other things, it's good to end on a chuckle about
yes, indeed it is.
Jesus having a bit of fun in the stir.
Yeah, exactly.
Because as well, were the other people around when Simon came back, and did they hear Jesus say, "Hey, Simon, go get a fish"?
Yeah, exactly. Because he shows up with the fish, the other people are going to think, "What?" Yeah. So we don't know that, but that's a possibility too. That they were blown away by this story.
Because previously we talked about how they fed the 4,000, so they got the fish and they just made fish out of fish.
Yeah, that's right. Jesus he's creative. His miracles are creative.
Yeah. So here he's using fish again, but in a different way.
Yeah, exactly.
And
indeed.
There's nothing consistently the same in Jesus.
No, he could have just as easily gone to the ladies who were supporting him in his ministry and say, "Hey, I need a couple of coins. Can you bring them over here? Thanks. The guys need the tax," and they would have done it.
Yeah, but it saves us. Well, I guess it tells us don't get into a rut and try doing things the same way all the time.
Stay vibrant. Stay fresh in your faith. Stay tuned into the Lord, because the Lord does miracles and He's fun. He does things in different ways. So let's stay attuned to what he wants to do, the way he wants to do it today.
Yeah, as long as we don't get
irreverent. Yeah. Yeah. Remember how big he is. Yeah. Hey, Adrian, you've done incredibly well to get through that through those 8 episodes we've recorded with.
That's because it was only 7.
It was only 7, was it?
It was 8. It
was 8.
It was 8.
I think. 8. Yeah. We did 3 and 5.
Yeah, 7 the previous time.
If we haven't, I've missed one. I think we've done 8 altogether. Well, thanks for being with us, Adrian. Thanks everyone for listening in. We'll talk to you next time.
It's all right. I'll go home and have my cold coffee because I can't have hot stuff because of me tooth.
I'll talk to you then. See ya.